use this for now, and then if we bring up some others for questions, we'll use the other mic. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm glad we got such a good attendance, and like Wayne said, we really appreciate CASWA and Green Country for their support to help us get this together and help us bring together as many people as possible to get the information out on OKR10 and what the changes are and what you need to be aware of. Can I get some hands as far as who in the audience are in the construction industry, builders, contractors, people who have to have OKR10 permit coverage for your sites? Okay, good. We've got some out here. I recognize a couple I know that I told are asked to come if they could make it. Excellent. How about MS4s? How many people are with the municipalities, with the non-traditionals, okay, that do inspections or have to do plan review, things like that? Excellent. Good. Okay. Well, like Wayne said, he set the table, kind of gave you the why of why we're here, why do we have to do this, why do we have to have this program, why do you need permit coverage. So in this presentation today, what I'm going to talk about are the nuts and bolts of what's changed with OKR10. So if you're in the construction industry and you've had OKR10 coverage before on your sites, what do you need to be aware of? What has changed? What are things that you're going to have to address in your SWP3 as you move into this new permit cycle? So we'll talk a little bit about the drafting process. We'll cover the overview of changes, and then we'll talk about the application process. If you have questions, ask them. If you have process questions, I'd ask you to hold those to the end, because I'm going to bring up Amber McIntyre with our Environmental Complaints and Local Services division, and she's going to help me address some of those because she does day-to-day work on the processing of applications, and she's the resource for that. And Matt Johnson as well is here as well, and he's the other resource in ECLS. Those two, if you've got questions on the nuts and bolts of the application process, excellent resources. So if you didn't get their contact information, we'll have it at the end as well. All right, so as far as the drafting process, Wayne touched on this a little bit. I'm going to go over it again, and I am going to give you the stakeholders' names. So we reviewed in our permitting section, Karen reviewed EPA's current CGP, and we developed a draft. She developed a draft based on that current CGP from EPA. We conducted stakeholder advisory committee group meetings and DEQ work group meetings. So we had both groups in to discuss where did we think we needed to, in addition to what EPA was going to require us to add to the permit, were there some things in our process that we thought we could change to make things better. That happened December 2011 through February 2012. And we submitted the final draft to EPA for review on March 20th of this year. We received and addressed comments from EPA. We got those back in June of this year. We had a public comment period which opened on June 29th and then closed on July 31st. Some of you probably attended the public meeting that was at DEQ on this. We addressed those public comments and then issued the CGP on August 13th, and it became effective on September 13th, which was excellent because the old one had expired the day before and we didn't want any gap in coverage. Okay, so the people that were involved in the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, they run the gamut of people that are impacted by OKR10. We had representatives from municipalities, we had builder representatives, we had consultants, we had representatives from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Richard was part of that group through INCOG. We had ODOT representatives and Home Builders Association representatives. So it kind of ran the spectrum there. So an important piece of information that you're going to need to know as you progress with this is where can you find OKR10? If you haven't already seen it or found it on our website, this is the location. Okay, I'll leave that up a couple of seconds if anybody needs it. All right, and if you, and like Richard said, if you want to access these slides after the conference, I'm going to have them on the DEQ website. It's going to be in Water Quality Division section. So if you go to our main page, go to Water Quality and Programs, and hopefully under the Stormwater page, we'll have those presentations there for you to access, and it'll have all this information. All right. So there are some basic areas of change that you need to be aware of. We have some definition changes. We have some changes to the requirements for impaired, outstanding, and sensitive waters. There's some changes to the endangered species provisions mainly on the process of things. There are some additions to the permit related to asphalt and concrete batch plants to bring it into line with what's in OKR10 so that the concrete batch plants and asphalt plants are on an even playing field. There's some changes to what's required in your stormwater pollution prevention plans. Again, there's also the buffer requirement that is new for this permit cycle. I'm only going to touch on this briefly in this presentation because there's a presentation at the end of the day where we're going to go into detail as far as how do you address this buffer requirement and what's out there, and Dr. Vogel is going to be helping with that presentation. All right, and then there are some form changes, and I'll just point out where those key changes are. Okay. As for the definition changes, there are some new terms. There's temporary stabilization, which is you have to provide temporary cover, and this has to occur during the establishment and growth of vegetation that would constitute your final stabilization, or you have to provide it in areas where earth disturbing activities will occur again, but you've stopped at this certain location for a certain period of time. So bear that in mind. If you're going to be developing a site and you're going to have ground cleared, but you're going to be leaving it for more than 14 days, that's temporary stabilization requirement comes into effect. So make sure you're aware of that as you develop your SWP3 and as you develop your site. For final stabilization, it's to provide permanent cover, and it will allow you to qualify for permit termination. Okay. We've had some changes to the owner-operator definition. It was owner/operator in the previous permit. We've replaced that simply with operator because as an owner, you might be the individual who owns the structure or the land, but that doesn't necessarily imply that you have operational control of the construction activities. So as we're currently enforcing on this, you have to have that operational control over those construction activities in order to qualify for permit coverage. And then we established the primary operator and secondary operator definitions. Again, this is to try to match the way we're enforcing the permit with what the permit actually says and how it's interpreted. It's primarily for use with larger common plans of development where you've got multiple parties meeting the definition of operator. And I think, yeah, we'll go into as far as a primary operator. You can, as a primary operator, this may be the developer at a site. The developer can elect to obtain permit coverage for all discharges at a construction site. And if they elect to do this, then basically what they're saying is, I've got development X, and I'm going to permit the entire site for the life of the site until it's completely built out. And so you're ensuring that you have sufficient overall controls at the site to make sure that BMPs are in place and they're properly maintained. You develop and maintain the SWP3. You also have to identify who your secondary operators are. Those could be the builders. They could be the utility contractors. They could be your dirt guy, whoever is involved in the site that meets the definition of operator, but who you're willing to cover. You're going to permit the site and cover their activities under your SWP3. And then as part of that, you identify who they are and where they're going to be active, and then you make sure that they're aware of what your SWP3 says and where the BMPs are for your site, so that they know that you're going to maintain them or you've asked them to maintain them, however that agreement works with you. For a secondary operator, if the primary operator decides that they don't want to maintain coverage for the entire development for the life of the site, then if the secondary operators decide they want to pull their own permit coverage, they can do that. But then they'll have to develop the SWP3 for the areas of activity that they're going to be doing within your development. So if you have builders, or if you are a builder in a development and the developer doesn't have stormwater coverage and you haven't entered into an agreement with that developer regarding stormwater coverage, then you obtain your own. You tell us what lots you're building on within the development, and you can have a single permit cover all of the lots in that development that you're building on, and you can modify it as you add lots. You may buy just a certain number the first time and then come back in and add, 5 or 6 more. Then you can modify that notice of intent and include those into your SWP3. But make sure that your site map and some of the other SWP3 requirements cover those new lots when you make that modification. Okay. If the primary operator elects to hold and hold the permit coverage and the secondary operators come to an agreement with the primary operator, then they have to be familiar with and abide by the primary operator's permit and SWP3. They have to notify the primary operator prior to beginning earth disturbing activities, because again, that primary operator is going to want to update their site map with BMPs and things like that. And they have to avoid damaging and interfering with BMP effectiveness. Okay. So that, and really the primary secondary operators really to clarify how you can permit sites. So if you've got questions on that, hold those to the end and we'll talk some more about that. Impaired, outstanding, and sensitive waters, there's some changes there. There are some changes to the map. You can see, for instance, on this map, let's see where my pointer is, for 2012, you can see that the Red River, it was on the 2005 map. It's no longer on the 2012 map. So check out the map, make sure you know what has come off the list and what's come on the list. And I think I'll cover that in the buffer presentation as well. All right, another way to determine whether or not you're in one of those areas is to go to our Flex Viewer. And unfortunately, we don't have Wi-Fi access right now. Otherwise, we would have taken you to this and shown you how it works. But if you've got questions on how the Flex Viewer works, Matt and Amber, they work with it on a daily basis, and they can definitely help you out on how to determine if you're an impaired, sensitive, or outstanding resource water. Okay. The requirements that have changed for sites discharging to ORWs or ARCs, you have to indicate that on your notice of intent and address it in your SWP3. The inspection frequency has changed. It was once every 14 days. It's now once every 7 days. And then, as it was before, within 24 hours of ½ inch of rainfall or greater. And then for stabilization requirements, both temporary and permanent, has to be initiated immediately following the day earth disturbing activities have temporarily or permanently ceased. And it has to be completed within 7 days. So initiated, you have to start the process. You have to be done with the stabilization measures, whatever they are, within 7 days. And make sure you're documenting this and have it available in your SWP3. There's also, for outstanding and sensitive waters, there's a requirement to have a 100-foot buffer zone from any stream, creek, waterway that is within or borders your construction site. Or if you can't provide that 100 feet of undisturbed natural buffer at your site, you can use Addendum I, which is the buffer guidance, to determine equivalent controls that you can put in place instead. And like I said, we're going to cover this in greater detail in the presentation later this afternoon. I just want to get you thinking about this so that when we get to the buffer presentation, you'll be able to ask some questions and we'll be able to clarify any questions you have on this issue. Okay. Also, the requirement for a temporary or permanent sediment basin, it's required for areas that serve an area of 5 acres or greater that are disturbed. It used to be 10 acres or greater. It's now 5 in the ORWs or the ARCs. And then the corrective actions are required. And I think Michelle will talk about that more in her presentation as far as what is a corrective action and when is it required and how do you document that. Okay. Let's see. Impaired water or water quality impaired water is a new term. It's identified by the state or EPA pursuant to Section 303D or the Clean Water Act as not meeting the applicable state water quality standards. It includes waters with approved or established TMDLs and waters for which a TMDL has not yet been established or approved but is listed as impaired. Okay, for sites that are within 1 mile, and that's as the crow flies, correct? Yes, thank you. And it's for sediment, impaired for sediment. Make sure that you indicate that on your notice of intent. Change your inspection frequency has increased from once every 14 days to once every 7 days, and within 24 hours of a ½ inch of rainfall or greater. And then again with the stabilization requirements, initiate them immediately following the day earth disturbing activities have temporarily or permanently ceased, and then complete those stabilization activities within 7 days. So mainly so the point here is, you know, any bare dirt you have that's not going to be worked on in the near future, make sure you get it covered so that you're not introducing more sediment into your runoff. Okay, endangered species provisions. You have to determine whether or not you're located within a corridor of an aquatic resource of concern. If you are located within an aquatic resource of concern, your SWP3 should describe the area and specify the measures to be employed to protect that species. If you can't meet one of those two criteria, then you have to contact DEQ. It used to be U.S. Fish and Wildlife. You could contact them when they don't meet the criteria and get some technical assistance on what to do. Now contact DEQ, contact Amber or Matt, and they will provide that assistance. Okay. Concrete and asphalt batch plants. This is a section that's been added to OKR10. In the previous, it's mainly to add some requirements in the old OKR10 as in this one. If you have an asphalt plant or a concrete batch plant, that's a support activity. And in order to be a support activity, it has to meet the following criteria. It has to be directly related to your construction site that has the OKR10 coverage that you're going to cover it under. It can't be a commercial operation that serves multiple unrelated construction projects. And the BMPs for the support activity have to be identified in the construction site's SWP3. And it can't be located within a watershed of an outstanding resource water. There's no new discharges from those types of activities allowed in the ORWs. But if you have a batch plant or an asphalt plant that meets the definition, meets the criteria for a support activity, then you can permit its stormwater discharges under your construction site's OKR10 permit coverage. But it needs to be included in your SWP3. So if you do have that plant out there, and it might be a couple miles from your site, make sure there's a map in there that references where that is and where the BMPs are, and make sure that, you know, inspections or anything like that that's in the text of your SWP3, make sure it references that support activity as well. It also, in this round of OKR10, it brings in the monitoring and reporting requirements that were required of asphalt and concrete batch plants in OKR05. Those requirements were not included in the previous version of OKR10, but will be in this one. So if you have that support activity, there are going to be some basic requirements now that they're going to have to meet in order to level the playing field with those batch plants. They'll have to conduct quarterly visual monitoring. They'll have to complete at least an annual site inspection. So if you have a batch plant that's only going to be at your site for 3 months, you have to conduct at least one site inspection during the time that it's there with your construction site. And then you'll have to submit at least one annual comprehensive site compliance evaluation report. Again, for those projects that last less than a year. If they last more than a year, you'll have to submit an ACER for every year that it's out there associated with that site. Okay. ACERs are the annual review of the plant as well as the SWP3. So your annual site inspection goes into your ACER report. It's a part of it, but it's also a review of the SWP3. Complete it using the findings from your annual comprehensive site inspection. It's due by March 1st each year to DEQ. And then this is the website that you can go to find that ACER form. And I'll give you a couple minutes if you guys need to write it down. Okay. Okay, and then specifically for the requirements we just talked about are for concrete and asphalt plants. For batch asphalt plants only, there is some numeric effluent limitation monitoring. So you're actually going to have to collect a sample of the discharge from your asphalt plant and send it and have it tested for TSS, for total suspended solids, for oil and grease, and for pH once a year. And again, for those sites that are going to be around less than a year, you have to collect at least one sample from the discharge. Okay, and there are requirements for how to collect that sample, where to send it. It'll have to be analyzed by a certified lab, and your results will have to be sent on a discharge monitoring report. Okay, sent into DEQ. Okay. Like I talked about, conducted by a certified lab, submitted to DEQ by March 1st, so it'll come in with your ACER. And you can find the form at the website listed on the screen. And again, for construction sites lasting less than a year, conduct at least one NELM sampling event, conduct quarterly visual monitoring, and submit your ACER. Okay. All right, so changes to SWP3 requirements. We've added a reference to the practice of engineering. So it states that you have to use of a licensed professional engineer for SWP3 preparation is not required by the permit. However, if any part of the SWP3 involves the practice of engineering, then those engineering practices and designs are required to be prepared by a licensed professional engineer. Okay, so qualifying statement in the permit, make sure that you're following that if it applies to your site. We've modified the content of the SWP3 to be consistent with EPA's construction stormwater permit. We've added the corrective action provision, which means that if on an inspection you identify an issue with any of your BMPs, then you have to complete the corrective action to address that within 7 days from the time of discovery. And you have to document that corrective action, whatever action you took, within 7 days of completion of that action. So there's some actions that have to be done on your part, and then there are some documentation requirements as well. Okay. You have to address all of the non-numeric effluent limitation guidelines that Wayne talked about this morning, including erosion and sediment control, stabilization, and pollution prevention. You have to address the monitoring requirements for your support activities, make sure that's in your SWP3. And then one that you're going to need to be aware of that's a change for this year is straw or hay bale barriers are no longer allowed as erosion or sediment control. So if that's something you've used in the past, that's not something that's going to be acceptable under this new permit, okay? We'll have to go to something different. The research on those BMPs has really indicated that they're not effective. It would be better to use the hay and straw as a mulch rather than using it as in a hay bale barrier type BMP. Okay. The buffer requirements, again, a brief discussion on buffer requirements. There are 2 buffer requirements. If you're discharging into a receiving water located on or immediately adjacent to your site, and you're not in an ORW or an ARC, you have to provide 50 feet of natural buffer as measured from the top of the bank to the disturbed portions of your site. Okay. If you are in an ARC or an ORW watershed, then you have to provide 100 feet of the vegetated buffer between the area disturbed and perennial or intermittent streams, or 50 feet between areas disturbed and ephemeral streams or drainages. And so you know, if you're not aware of the stream types and what their definition is, a perennial stream is one that flows year-round. An intermittent stream is one that flows periodically or seasonally, or when there's enough water from various sources to get a flow. And an ephemeral exists for a short period of time, usually during a rainy period, and it may have a defined channel even when it's dry. So be aware of what type of stream is near your site, because if it's adjacent to or on your site, you'll have to, this buffer requirements will apply to your site. And we'll want to see all of that addressed in your SWP3. Okay. There are 3 compliance alternatives for the buffer requirements. The first one is that you can provide and maintain 50 or 100 feet of natural undisturbed buffer. If you can't do that, the second alternative is to provide whatever amount that you can, whatever width that you can. That's, and then install additional erosion and sediment controls to meet what a buffer of 50 or 100 feet would have supplied. And then alternative 3 is if you can't provide a buffer at all, given your site conditions, then you have to implement equivalent erosion and sediment controls to achieve the same sediment load reduction as provided by that 50 or 100 foot natural buffer, okay? And again, we're gonna walk through this in the buffer presentation at the end, so hopefully it'll be a little clearer as we go through that. I know it's a lot to digest right away. Natural buffers and equivalent sediment controls, this requirement doesn't apply when you have water crossings or stream restoration authorized under Clean Water Act Section 404 permit, or if there are no natural buffers because of pre-existing development conditions. Okay. Some of the form changes that have occurred, there are new fees, and it's referenced in 252-606 Appendix D of our administrative code. There's an application fee that is new. So every time you submit a notice of intent for a project, there's an application fee of $100. There's also the annual permit fee of $330 plus whatever that consumer price index adjustment is during that year. Right now it's $340.56 for a full year of permit coverage. It's prorated for the first year, but if you end a project and it doesn't take a full year, we don't refund any money for whatever's remaining of the year that you haven't used. Unfortunately, that's the way the process works. Okay, we've added the purpose of the project to the notice of intent. So let us know what your project is. Is it a subdivision? Is it a commercial development? What type of disturbance is it? Mainly this is for our processing so that we know when we get it in whether or not this is really an agricultural disturbance and it doesn't need to be covered under OKR10, or it's Stonebriar Farms and it's a development, it's a subdivision, and it does need OKR10 coverage, kind of just to help us clarify all of that. So be aware of that. That's on your notice of intent. Make sure that you include that information for us, and that will speed up the processing of your notice of intent. So Amber and Matt don't have to send it back to you and ask for clarification. Okay. We also have a new checkbox on the notice of intent. The question asks, is this site part of the common plan of development or sale? So it will also let us know, in this case, if there are multiple builders that are getting coverage in a development, it'll let us know that they're separate, but they all need to be permitted because, you know, this covers lot and block X, Y, and Z, and this one covers the rest. And then estimate your area of disturbance. Okay. We added a couple of new certification statements that you have to initial. The first one is that you certify that this facility is registered with the Secretary of State of Oklahoma, and then we ask that you provide the full name of your company or corporation if it's different than listed in Section 1 above. If we added this because when we run into enforcement, if we want to make sure that we get the official documentation to the correct individuals, so this will help us make sure that we're sending all of our correspondence to the right people. And then also, we ask that you certify that a stormwater pollution prevention plan has been prepared for this facility in accordance with the permit. You're required to, by the permit, to have your SWP3 developed before you submit your notice of intent, before you start earth disturbing activities. So be aware of that. Okay. The application process, to clarify for those of you that might have sites that were under development and were covered under OKR10, the previous version of OKR10, for those sites, if they're complete, submit a notice of termination or send us a letter, something to allow us to remove you from our database to say, okay, this site's done. and pay. I think those invoices have already gone out for the permit fees. Make sure that you pay that, but they may have included the application fee, which does not have to be paid. So be aware of that when you get your invoice in if you haven't already paid for it. If it's still under construction, you need to submit a notice of intent no later than December 13th of this year, and then you'll need to pay the permit and application fees that were invoiced. But don't submit an additional application fee with your notice of intent. So it's a little confusing that way because you've already been billed. That bill includes your application fee and the permit fee because we assumed that you would still be in operation under the new permit. So be aware of that. We don't want you to double pay that application fee if you don't have to, okay? So pay attention to that when you're submitting your notices of intent. Okay. For sites where operator changes, submit the NOI form and indicate that it's a modification. And this can occur at any point throughout the life of this permit. Now, not necessarily just for the reapplication. Make sure that NOI form with the modification box checked is submitted at least 2 days before assuming operational control. Include the application fee with the new NOI, and then only submit your SWP3 if the project is located within an ORW or an ARC, or if it's a site that's going to disturb 40 acres or greater. Okay, that's still a requirement. If you submit an SWP3 and it's not one of those, in one of those areas or doesn't meet those criteria, my understanding is that then we'll send it back to you and say, we didn't review this, we're going to process your notice of intent, here's your SWP3 back. We want to make sure that we're reviewing the SWP3s that are necessary so that we can keep the processing of the notices of intent moving forward. Okay, for those sites for new construction that occurs that's beginning after September 12th, 2012, so under the new permit, make sure you submit a notice of intent at least 30 days prior to the start of earth disturbing activities. Include your application fee with the notice of intent, and then again, only submit if you meet those requirements. And make sure that you're including the application fee. If you don't include the application fee, that's going to slow down the processing of your notice of intent because then they'll have to send you notice that you haven't submitted it and you'll have to send the check in, and we want to avoid that if we can so that you can get your permit authorization as quickly as possible. Okay, and so you know where to mail it to. Mail it to DEQ, ECLS, Stormwater Unit, to be P.O. Box 1677 here in Oklahoma City, and make your checks payable to Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. Okay. So if you've got questions as far as the permitting process goes, permit administration, or if you want technical assistance on site compliance, these are our contact information. Wayne went over this before, but I wanted to give it to you again so that you've got a chance to write it down this time. And we have limited staff, but if you have questions, you need help, you want us to come out to your site and take a look at what's going on, we'll try to do the best we can to help you out with that as our time allows. Okay, because like Wayne said, we're after compliance. Okay, so, and this is usually me at my desk, surrounded by the paperwork I have to get done. So, does anybody have any questions on this process? Let's see. Okay, Mickey's going to have a mic for us because they're recording it and they want to have all our comments recorded and they want to be able to, so everybody can hear it. There we go.
Be nice. I'm nice. I'm always
always nice.
This 7 days, I guess, the inspection frequency versus the 14 days was before, and also the 5 acre disturbed areas versus the 10 was before. When is that effective?
That's effective now, but that's only if your site is in the watershed of an outstanding resource water or an aquatic resource of concern, those more stringent requirements. If your site is outside of that, then the 14 days and the 10 acres for the sediment basin, those requirements still apply.
Thank you. See, that was nice.
Thank you.
Carrie, in a subdivision, when the developer has all of his builders permitted and he has all his common areas, vegetated, are you going to let him file a notice of termination?
If he has notified the builders and the builders have permit coverage and all of his areas that he has responsibility for are, they meet the final stabilization requirements, then yes, the developer can terminate. But we're going to want to make sure that those builders have coverage. So we'll go and look at the site and make sure that everybody's got coverage.
Am I on? Okay. Quick question as it relates back to the permit. One of our comments was that we were requesting electronic NOIs, and I know that I've been told that's not possible, but I guess my question is, what's it going to take? Is it a statutory requirement to be able to do electronic NOIs, or is it a resource issue? And then my other question relates to some states do an automatic authorization in their permit where you're automatically authorized after 5 days. And I guess my question is, what would it take to make that possible in this state?
Where did Wayne go? I can only address that from the inspector side of you. Tim, I don't know if that's anything you want to address, but my understanding of the ENOI process is that that's going to take some internal work that we're still working on to accept things electronically. We're not there yet. We want to get there, but we're not there yet. As far as automatically covering a site within 5 days, I would think that would have to be included in the permit, and it's not something that's in OKR10, so it's not something that we can do at this time. Okay. Right. As Amber said, Amber, do you want to come up and in case we have any questions? This is Amber McIntyre with ECLS. She with Matt helps process it. They are trying to expedite the notices of intent so that you get your authorization as quickly as possible.
Don, we've changed the way we review that. We've realized that we did have kind of a log jam there with some of the way we were getting some of our permits out. We've changed our procedures. Our group, ECLS, anything that does not have to have the SWP3 reviewed in order to issue it, as long as we get a complete application, you're going to get that permit within 10 days. That's our goal. As long as we get payment up front, you submit a complete NOI, we're going to get that permit out within 10 days. The SWP3 review takes a little bit longer, but
we're working on that as well.
yeah.
Any other questions?
I had a question about, I just want to clarify the TMDL on the NOI. Did you say we only mark that if it's a TMDL for sediment or it's impaired for sediment?
No, if it's impaired at all. If you look on the Flex Viewer and it's listed in the, as an impaired water, then you mark that always.
Okay,
regardless of what it's impaired for.
Okay. Can I ask another question while I've got the microphone?
You've got the mic. Hurry before Nikki steals it.
Concerning the primary operator and secondary operator, if a developer chooses to be the primary operator and covers the entire site, and there's a violation caused by secondary operator, say a builder, is the primary operator, then is the violation to him, or does it go to the...
Yeah, if you have permit coverage and there's an issue at your site where an inspector comes out and takes a look at it, if you have permit coverage, the notice of violation will be addressed to you. So if you're in that situation and you are the primary operator, make sure you've got some sort of agreement with your secondary operators that there's some consequence if they don't follow your SWP3. Document in your SWP3 any contact you've made with that secondary operator, asking them to address the issues at their site, and then there's always the primary operator. You're doing this voluntarily because those secondary operators have agreed to follow your SWP3. If they aren't, you have the ability to say, you're not covered under my notice of intent, you need to go get your own. And then if they need to get their own, then if they're not permitted and there's a problem at their site that's within your development, then we'd address it to them. Okay, but you need to, if you decide to be the primary operator and hold coverage for all of the activity that's going on in the development, you need to make sure that those builders are following through, or document what's going on so that you provide the inspectors with enough information to address the notice of violation to the appropriate party.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You're going to get into the map this afternoon, right? So you can show them the flex viewer that you're talking about?
Yeah, unfortunately, we did not get Wi-Fi access with this. It's something we're going to work on for tomorrow, but I don't think it's a situation we can remedy today.
Oh, okay.
We'll try again at lunch. The DEQ laptop, we can get Wi-Fi access, but we don't get picture. So we're going to have to figure out what that issue is. And if we do solve that, then later this afternoon, if Amber and Matt are still here, I'll ask them to come up and walk us through it so that you guys know how to use that flex viewer.
Okay.
They'll be here. Yay! Thanks, Amber.
I have a question. On the, here,
There you are.
do you want me to stand up so you can see me?
No, that's all right. I can see you now.
On the NOI form, you
Yes.
are showing the total disturbed area, but that's not necessarily happening at one time. Is there a way to break down based on, like when they relocate the utilities, they're necessarily not gonna come and cover it back up. Then we come and build a detour and they stabilize it, then we build the main highway. That's 3 different phases that every time it gets covered. But on the NOI, it shows total disturbed area 30 acres, but that's not necessarily the case.
More, if you phase it, you're saying you'd have more like 10 acres disturbed at each time.
Or less.
Because you're gonna have, or
Correct.
less, because you're gonna have that coverage.
Correct.
I
think
want
they
it on the
may-
NOI. I want to see what you're going to disturb altogether on the NOI, and your phasing of it is something you would address within your stormwater pollution prevention plan.
Okay.
One more question on the NOI form. We've run into a couple where the entity is not registered with the Secretary of State. So what happens if you don't initial that box?
That's okay. If you're
Yeah.
not registered with the Secretary of State, then you just don't initial. But if you are, we want you to.
But it doesn't kick out the NOI, and you're still going to process it? Okay.
No, it's mainly enforcement thing, so we know where to address the appropriate paperwork. There was a question in the back, Mickey.
On the sediment basins, new requirement is to drain from surface. Is that correct?
For sediment basins,
For
when
sediment
they're
basins,
required?
No, are they required to drain from the surface water? That language wasn't in the last permit, but it does now say that when discharging from a sediment basin, utilize outlet structures that would draw water from the surface in order to minimize.
Okay, yeah,
So-
that's more where is your outlet structure placed on your sediment basin? I think we stayed silent on it in the previous version. In this version, the wording is more prescriptive, and it says that your outlet structure needs to draw from the surface instead of from the bottom, where you're going to get that sediment-laden water sent out of your basin.
So if you have a detention structure that'll eventually be detention, you have to have a riser or an outlet that comes off of that.
Or
So-
some outlet structure that removes it from the top layer rather than the bottom. Yeah, that's what's required.
And just one more while I have it. On the wording for disturbed area, it says you're required to disturb minimal area, but there's nothing that says 10 acres at a time, 5 acres at a time. Is there any guidance on, what is required? If you have a 40-acre site, is it still okay to go grade all 40 acres? Strip it? Or is...
Yeah, that's a decision that you as the developer or the builder or the contractor, you have to decide how many acres you want to disturb at one time. If you disturb 40 acres or greater, then the requirement is that you submit the SWP3 to us, and then that will have to be reviewed, and you'll have comments back, and it's an operational decision that you have to decide. But you need to tell us how many acres that are going to be disturbed total for that site that you're permitting. Now, if you're permitting phases, then how many acres in that phase are going to be disturbed? That's what you need to tell us. Okay. Any other questions?
Can I say something about that?
Okay.
I think what Ben was getting at is that we may have a 8-mile project a highway project, that as we're trying to phase things, then we may have 10 acres at a time, but the total might be 60. So the NOI is going to say 60, but in reality, at a time, is that what you were trying to ask Ben earlier? How we could demonstrate that we're only going to disturb this much at a time?
But you're going to permit the whole process under one notice of intent, correct?
That's
Rather than
correct.
doing it in phases?
That'd just be a BMP. I mean, if you're gonna clear 40 acres at a time, then you're gonna really have to beef up your controls on your site to make sure that you're not discharging any sediment from your site. If you phase it, that's considered a best management practice that would be much more preferred than for you to just go in and clear 40 acres.
And I would say just make sure that you include that information in your SWP3 so that when Karen or whoever's reviewing the SWP3, when they get to it, they can see how you're going to phase it. Make sure that it's clear.
But we show that in some other parts of plans, like say erosion control area. When we break down, we phase the project, you know, there are other parts of plans that, like, you know, our plans is not just one sheet or two, although SWP3 being the most revised sheet, but there's other sheets that, you know, we include to explain ourselves, how we phase this, how we break it down. And I thought our hope is that, you know, I mean, the whole plans to be looked at and look at the erosion control detail sheets. That's where we put most of the information, how we break down the information, and then a lot of times we've been successful just trying to explain sometime on the phone. I think we make it a just general practice that everyone look at those sheets before, you know, having a problem about it. I think that would help.
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate the comment.
Statement, not a question. Anybody else? Do you guys need to go to lunch with Carrie?
Okay, on our plans, we show, or highway plans, we show a specific sequence of construction. And our disturbed area explanation on SW3P is based on that sequence of construction. But once it goes to the field, sometimes the contractor change the sequence of construction based on how they are going to build the project. So obviously, the SWP is no longer representing the way we intended for it to be done versus the way it is being done. So are they going to redo, is the contractor going to have to redo the SW3P, submit it again in order to get a permit?
You won't have, once you submit the SWP3 and it's gone through the process and you received your authorization, you don't have to resubmit the SWP3. We recognize that SWP3s are living documents. This is what you intend before the project gets started. Things change as you get the project started. Your contractor might have a different idea, or different teams are available at different times than you expected. Make sure that your SWP3 is updated throughout the life of your project so it reflects the current conditions at the site. Because as an inspector, what we're going to look for is what's on this, what does your SWP3 call for, and what's out there at the site. Because your SWP3 is your way of telling us how you're going to comply with the permit requirements. That's what you're telling us. So we're going to want to make sure it's out there. If it calls for silt fence in a certain location, make sure it's there, or document why it's no longer needed, remove it from your site map. But just keep it up to date so that it reflects current conditions. Okay? Are we done?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to cut the questions off right here. I'm sorry.